A lot of fun, a lot of comments. 23 to 4, and I am pleased to welcome to the studio Gabi Hollows.
Good afternoon.
Well, you must listen in to obesity issues at schools, knowing some of the work Fred Hollows Foundation does with our first Australians, and think, wow, some of the nutrition problems.
It's a very sensitive discussion point, actually. I remember many years ago we were trying to do a little bit of stuff in one of the communities, and a lot of the Indigenous women were, Aboriginal women were feeling a little bit, sensitive to the fact that they were putting on a lot of weight, that had kids and all that sort of stuff. But then they started up their own little, like a Weight Watchers group. But then the husbands got really jealous because the women were doing something and the men weren't. But speaking about kids, I've had 6 kids at school, and it'd be lovely to say you could drop them off when they're 5 and pick them up when they're year 12. It'd be fantastic. I think I did combined 78 years of children at school, so it's a lot of lunches and a lot of. But our kids always had their, they always took their lunch from home, and they'd only sort of hover around mother when I was sort of anywhere near the tuck shop. But no, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. But I do think that kids, in the old days we used to run around and get out there and come home when you were hungry. But kids these days don't seem to have that same freedom, really.
No. But look, it's interesting insight to you. Mother, wife, and indeed running Fred Hollows Foundation, which was set up, a few months before Fred passed. So it's almost 20 years since we lost him.
Yes, the anniversary is actually the 3rd of September this year. So it is 20 years. 1992, we lost Fred in February of 93. So I use my kids as my yardstick, really, Gary. They're my measures of how long things have been going on. And, my eldest son, Cam's 30 now, and my twins are 22. So there's been a lot of change. And, in fact, it was really interesting. It's a little bit sort of sensitive with my kids. They've actually opened a new Madame Tussauds in Sydney. Cam's always been a bit freaked out by things like that, and a couple of his cousins were here from New Zealand on the weekend, and they decided they wanted to go and have a look at the aquarium, and Madame Tussauds is next door, and there's actually a Fred down there, and it was quite funny because Cam said he can always remember looking. He said he didn't know whether his nose was quite right because he could always remember he was looking up but not looking down on Fred. And one of my twins, when she was in there the first time, and it's only Ruth and Rosa, the only other 2 girls that have been there, and they said, "Gee, he wasn't very tall, was he, Mum?" And I said, "No, well, I guess you were really, really tiny when you were remembering your dad." But
that must be very, very difficult for them, though.
It is. A couple of other ones haven't been in yet, but it's really quite bizarre, actually,
because they've grown up their life without their dad.
That's right.
Although they really, in one sense, have had everybody talking about their dad. I know.
Well, some kids, like Ruth did a Rotary exchange a few years ago to Finland, and one of the girls found out that she was a Hollows, and she went, "Oh, Fred Hollows, how's he going?" And Ruth said, "Well, actually, we lost him when I wasn't even 3." And then other kids, school kids and people do projects on Fred, and they see his ad, the things on TV, and they still look. He really, really is alive in so many people's eyes, literally. And he's very present to people still, which I think is fantastic.
I was remarking earlier that, you can give somebody fish, you can teach them to fish, but if they can't see the fish, this is really the work of the Fred Hollows Foundation. It's about giving people this gift of sight.
It's quite a, we just launched this new in Fred's footsteps in 20 years of restoring sight last week in Canberra, last Thursday, and it's a very, very large story, Gary. And what we've achieved is just unbelievable in the last 20 years, and I just know that it could not have been done without the assistance of our fantastically generous Australians, and our Australian government have been wonderful too. And, people were just, everyone kind of knew about Fred, and we really did, so many people in Australia when he was doing the National Trachoma and Eye Health Program where I was working, out in the bush in the 70s, and then he was given that wonderful accolade of being named Australian of the Year, although he was born in New Zealand.
We claim them.
Yes, of course. And we've got Sue outside too, who works for us, who's a good Kiwi girl, but she's Australian too.
Yeah.
But seriously, people have been so incredibly so positive in their giving, and because they know that we really do actually achieve things, and it's a very, as Fred said, he had a wonderful opportunity because he had a trade where he could actually make a difference to people, and there's nothing better than an ophthalmologist being able to give someone back their sight. the saddest thing for an ophthalmologist is not being able to give someone back their sight. So, when we say around about sort of $25 is the average cost of what it costs for us to do that surgery, into the poorest of people in some of the most, really remotest areas in the world, we're actually reaching them, and their whole life changes. And for every blind person, really, there's always someone assigned to look after them. In fact, it was quite ironic. Today we're just driving into town and there was a guy doing his, with a walking cane, doing his guide dog training, or his cane training. And I thought that's amazing because, that poor guy probably isn't going to get his sight back.
No.
And but when you've got, 3/4 of the people who are blind that aren't, that they don't have to be blind if they had access to surgery, and most of the major percentage of surgery, that's needed to be done in the world is for cataract surgery, those people are just, potentially holding someone else back, and it's often a young child or a young girl or somebody who's looking after a blind person in a community. And it's very easy to count blind people in communities. So the figures are very accurate. So, around about in the year 2000, a whole lot of organisations got together that worked in vision and restoring sight, and sort of pledged that by the year 2020, and it's a bit of a play on the 2020 vision, that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Of course, we wanted to be able to do something about avoidable blindness. The stats then, they were reckoned there was about 45 million people who were blind then. And as I said, in every village, everyone knows how many blind people there are. So the stats are really accurate. And of those people, 90% had a treatable condition.
90%?
Yep. Of those people, 80% lived in developing countries.
Yeah.
And of those people, around about 65%. So that's roughly around about 3/4 of the people who are blind were the ones who were blind from cataract. And they're only blind because they hadn't had access to a surgeon.
I know people who are visually impaired, blind, however you want to term it. There are those who can live fully and function in their own way. But if you're able to restore sight, they'd say, thank you, I'll do it.
Absolutely,
any time.
Absolutely. Well, we've just got, for us, it's very, very exciting because you can really give someone back their sight, and things that you would see, like I was just in Vietnam recently. In fact, we went back to meet with Giap, who's the very famous little boy on the poster that everyone is so familiar with, that photograph of that little boy in Vietnam with Fred. And we were in a hospital in Hanoi, and I was downstairs just in the paediatric ward, and within about half an hour I saw about 25 blind kids who are actually little tiny babies who are blind because their mothers had rubella. That's the German measles. And there'd been a very nasty outbreak of rubella in Vietnam, so I guess about 18 months ago now. And those little kids were the ones that had survived. And, to see that many kids in one handful in half an hour was just the most devastating thing for me. I've never, ever seen anything like that. And that's the sort of thing there where those little babies, we operate on small children as well as, older people and adults. And often the kids that have, in many remote villages, that haven't had their sort of vaccinations, and mothers haven't been vaccinated. They're sometimes the ones that you get really early. But
and you can do something for them?
Oh yes, they have surgery.
Fantastic.
if you have access to the ophthalmologist. But for most people, going, when your hair goes grey and your eyes go grey, they just give up. They just think that that's their lot in life, and they don't ever expect to get to that. To have that opportunity of surgery, and they just take it in those countries. They don't, as Dave Moran said, one of our ophthalmologists who was working in China, they can't see us coming, so they never expect anything. So it's really about letting people know that you can do things. And our statistics actually in our China program, it's incredible in the province where we work in Zhengzhi. The rate of blindness is almost nil now because they've just got out there and done it. The rate in Pakistan has come down from to only about 1% now, when it was 2% of the population. So,
but Gabby, the point is, Fred Hollows Foundation now works in a lot of countries.
Yes.
How many countries?
Well, we've actually got active programs. The Fred Hollows Foundation Australia has active programs in about 19 countries.
That's
we've actually worked in around 35 different countries. There's the Fred Hollows Foundation New Zealand, which is part of our group of people, and they do all the Pacific and the remote areas and the islands, in the Pacific, PNG, East and Timor-Leste. But the foundation has done a lot of work in some places, and actually, really lowered the cataract rate. But the lens laboratories that are manufacturing those intraocular lenses in Eritrea and Nepal, those lenses now have been, exported to something like 75 different countries, only to be used on not-for-profit, to be used in prevention of blindness programs, which I think is an astounding, amazing sort of thing. And they've probably, between both the labs, produced well on the way to nearly 6 million lenses. So
6 million.
Yeah.
Well, look, the story is fantastic. I just, my life keeps intersecting with Fred Hollows Foundation, and I'm glad about that. The work you guys have done. I went through my own difficulty with sight problems many years ago, and so I have some appreciation for the joy of being able to get your sight back. But equally, the work you've done with the First Australians, Indigenous Australians, and boy, didn't they speak loudly in the Northern Territory on the weekend. They said, don't ignore us. We are people and we are proud and we want to do stuff.
Well, our Indigenous program, we have an office based in Darwin, and we work in a lot of the remote areas, and especially that East Katherine area in the Darwin Association, Sunrise Health. We've been working in that area for a very long time. Originally, we did quite a lot of work in Cape York, up north, far north Queensland, when, back in the early days when we first started the program. So communities there, unfortunately, as we say, people won't be going blind from their cataracts. They're going to be going blind from their diabetes and from their diabetic retinopathy and from their renal failure.
Which feeds into...
Which is, all the... And the thing that they required, first of all, what did they say? They wanted nutrition to be improved. You are what you eat. Well, and that's how we really started in our Indigenous work.
Number one thing we need is to improve nutrition so the kids get the building blocks. If you can get 0 to 4 right, you can maybe have a hope for what comes next. Love the work of Fred Hollows Foundation.
Thanks
You're
very
in town
much, Gary.
tonight.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Our exhibition's been on for a week, and your premier's going to open it officially tonight at Parliament House. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful collection of wonderful photographs that are on exhibit from the work over the last 20-odd years. And it's on till the end of this week. So if people can come along and have a look, I think you'll really get a real buzz out of the work that we've. The photographic exhibition shows all the work that's been done over the last sort of 20-odd years. So some
Gabi,
great photos.
All the best to you.
Thanks very much,
Good to see
Gary.
you. Gabi Hollows, 13 30 32. It's 11 to 4.
Your calls,
your city,
your station.
Why don't we talk?
For Double Action Arthritis Fighter. Suffering from arthritis? Try Arthritis Fighter.
Brisbane's own.
1116 4BC.